The air inside the chapel was heavier than the snow drifting outside. You could almost hear it settle over the pews, thick, waiting, like it knew what was about to happen. I sat alone in the back row, coat still on, hands folded so tight I could feel my own pulse in my palms. The silence wasn't reverent. It was cautious, fake. Grief here felt more like a performance than a shared sorrow. It had been years since I'd sat in this place. Ogden's small-town sanctuaries hadn't changed much. Stained glass, pinewood pews, hymnals with bent pages. But the people inside? They'd gotten sharper, colder. I scanned the room, not for comfort, but for warning signs. I already knew who wouldn't look my way. The last time I spoke to Grandpa, he was in his favorite chair, one hand on his journal, the other patting mine. "Brone, when the time comes," he said quietly, "you'll know why I did what I did." He didn't elaborate. He never did. Just left me with riddles and a deep-rooted sense that the storm hadn't even started yet. Around me, whispers passed like notes in a courtroom. Betia, my sister by blood, stranger by choice, was already dabbing her eyes with a tissue she hadn't used until someone walked in behind her. Mom, Bella, nodded politely at people like she was hosting a fundraiser, not burying her father. No one spoke to me. No one sat within 2 seats. "They're not mourning him," I whispered to myself. "They're waiting for what he left behind." That was when the pastor cleared his throat and gestured to a suited man standing beside the altar. "Mr. Elms requested a final statement be read aloud today. His attorney, Mr. Rickson, will read it now." The silence cracked. Heads turned. Mom's spine straightened like a flagpole. Basia blinked too many times in a row. My stomach clenched. Mr. Rickson approached the podium, opened a leather folder, and pulled out a neatly folded letter. His voice was calm but solemn as he began to read. "To those gathered today, thank you for coming. I won't take much of your time. I know how quickly some of you prefer to leave uncomfortable rooms. If you're hearing this, it means I've moved on. But before I go completely, I needed to set the record straight." He paused. I swear, even the snow outside seemed to stop falling. "I, Harold Elms, leave my entire estate, including the house at 1831 Parker Lane, the accounts at Ogden Federal, and all accompanying assets, to my granddaughter, Brone Elms." Gasps, a dropped hymnal, a muttered, "What?" from the second pew. "To my granddaughter Brone, the only one who stood by me, who never asked for anything, but gave everything. The rest of you know what you did, or didn't do." Mr. Rickson folded the letter slowly and stepped back. My ears rang. My heart should have been racing, but all I felt was stillness, like I'd just been handed something too fragile to hold. Then, the sound of movement shattered it. My father, who had sat stone-faced and silent until now, stood up. He walked down the center aisle like he owned it, reached the podium, snatched the letter from the folder, without asking, without hesitation. "This is a lie," he snarled. "She's a nobody." And with both hands, he tore the paper down the middle, slow and vicious, like he wanted every eye in that chapel to see the fibers separate. "No inheritance for strays," he shouted, holding up the torn pieces. Gasps turned into panic. Someone muttered a prayer. Batia put on a show of shock, while I watched Mom lower her gaze, her mouth barely twitching. She wasn't surprised. None of them were. He wasn't tearing paper. He was tearing through the last thread that connected me to them. I didn't stand, didn't cry. I just sat there, hands still clasped, shoulders back, staring at what used to be my grandfather's voice on paper. And now, just silence. I wasn't even angry, I thought. I was grieving something still alive. Then he turned toward me. "You will not steal what's ours." His voice cracked. Not from sorrow, but from rage. He stomped down the aisle, straight at me. People shifted. Some gasped. Others froze. No one moved to stop him. He pointed in my face, so close I could smell the coffee on his breath. "You planned this, didn't you? Playing the innocent little caretaker." When I didn't respond, he grabbed my arm, tight. I pulled back. His grip tightened. And then, in one sharp motion, he shoved me backward. My hip struck the pew edge. My ribs slammed against the wood. A sound I'll never forget. A crack, deep and wrong. Someone screamed. A woman I didn't recognize stood up. "What the hell are you doing?" she shouted. Bella stood slowly. "Let's go," she said, like this was a PTA meeting that had gone on too long. I curled forward, breath caught somewhere in my chest. No tears, just pain. And a sense of clarity so sharp it felt surgical. I looked up at Baisha, her face pale, lips tight. She looked away. If silence could bleed, I thought. I was pouring out. A funeral assistant rushed over, knelt beside me. "Are you okay? Can you stand?" "I can stand," I said, even though I wasn't sure. But I did. Slowly. Carefully. No one else moved. My family, those blood-bound statues, remained exactly where they were. As I stepped into the aisle, I looked back one last time. The will was gone. But something had been signed that day, clearer than ink, louder than law. My resolve. The urgent care center smelled like antiseptic and overcooked coffee. I sat on the edge of a paper-lined table, staring at the wall clock that ticked louder than any of the nurses walking by. My ribs throbbed beneath the band of gauze they'd wrapped around me, each inhale reminding me exactly where his hands had landed. Not one of them came with me, not Batya, not Bela, certainly not the man who raised his hand to me and then turned his back without hesitation. I arrived alone, gave my name with a half-swallowed wince, and answered questions like I was reporting a stranger, not my own father. A nurse in purple scrubs tapped gently on the doorframe. She was probably in her 50s, her name tag read Cora, and she had that seasoned, no-nonsense tone that nurses in small towns always seem to carry. She looked at the bruise blooming across my ribs and said, not unkindly, "Family, huh?" "They're the first ones to cut deep and the last ones to admit they did." I gave a small smile. Guess I forgot to read the fine print. She didn't press, just handed me a printout of aftercare instructions and quietly excused herself. Later, in the bathroom mirror, I lifted my shirt and stared at the purpling skin. It looked like a fingerprint stretched out, his anger left behind in color. But the ache that settled inside me went deeper than the bone. Something else had fractured that day, and no brace was going to fix it. That night, when the adrenaline faded and the silence grew louder, I kept replaying the words. No inheritance for strays. They didn't echo, they stabbed. I closed my eyes, trying to remember the exact moment the letter was read. Not just the words, but how he said them. Grandpa's voice had been deliberate, almost tender, calling me the only one who stood by me. I hadn't really let those words in at the time. I'd been too frozen to feel them. But now, stripped of ceremony and noise, they carried weight, intent, finality. Bella had blinked slowly when the name Brone was mentioned. Baitya hadn't blinked at all, just watched me, expression unreadable. But Dad, he looked like a man who'd been robbed, not by circumstance, but by me. And that was the turning point in my mind. I wasn't gifted anything. They saw me as a thief. For years, I'd written off the small things, being called her instead of my daughter, never getting a real seat at family dinners, being introduced to friends as the one who helps out around the house. I thought maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe that's just how they were. But that day, those suspicions turned into truth, cemented in the silence of people who were never going to choose me. If you don't carry the name, you don't earn the legacy. That's the message I heard loud and clear. I remembered a quote I once saw taped to a library bookshelf. Blood may run thicker than water, but love runs deeper than both. It never made more sense than it did now. What gutted me wasn't the paper being ripped. It was the realization that the man who gave me my last name had never actually believed I was his. By the next morning, whispers had taken shape. I didn't need to check Facebook, but I did. People who hadn't spoken to me in years were posting cryptic condolences. Photos of the funeral were already floating around, including one of Batya mid-sob, hands clasped to her chest like a grieving widow in a soap opera. The caption, "A farewell not just to a man, but to a foundation." I scrolled further. One of my cousins had posted, "Did anyone else think that will was strange?" Followed by a thread of replies. some agreeing, others defending. A few texted me directly. "Hey, are you okay? Why did you let it get that far? Was it worth it?" But the one that really stayed with me came from a second cousin I barely knew. "I didn't know you were the heir. I thought he left it all to your dad." That's when it hit me. This wasn't a fight behind closed doors anymore. It was out in the open, and no matter what I said, someone would twist it. I deleted every app from my phone, changed my number, blocked half the people who shared my last name. I didn't need digital noise echoing the mess I was already living in real life. Back at the house, my house now, technically, I stepped inside like I was walking into someone else's memory. The light still flickered in the hallway. The coat rack still leaned slightly from the time Grandpa tried to fix it himself instead of calling a repairman. But everything felt changed. I checked the locks, closed the blinds, touched the banister where Grandpa used to rest his hand on his way upstairs. In the study, his photo still sat on the desk. I stared at it for a long time before finally whispering, "Why me? Why now?" There wasn't an answer, but I didn't need one, because I already knew. I was the only one who would protect what he built, not just the walls and the wood, but the values, the story, the integrity behind it all. He hadn't left me the house out of sentiment. He'd done it because he knew what they were capable of. He knew they'd come for it, and he knew I'd stay and fight. I stood there, rubbing the ache in my side, knowing the bruise would fade long before the war even started. I wasn't scared of being alone. I was scared of who still thought they owned this house. I jolted awake in the dark, unsure if it was the throbbing in my side or the memory that had stirred me. The house was silent, but inside me, everything pulsed. The echo of his voice, the sound of my own panicked breath, the shrillness of the phone as I dialed 911. It all came rushing back, even before my feet hit the floor. It had been raining that night, one of those Utah spring storms that rolled in fast, soaked everything, and left as quickly as they came. Grandpa had gone to bed early, worn out from an afternoon spent arguing with the cable company about a bill he swore was 30 cents higher than it should have been. I laughed when he slammed the remote down and muttered, "They think I'm dead already." If only I'd known. The sound I heard from his room wasn't loud, just something off. A gasp that didn't sound complete. A silence that didn't feel natural. When I opened the door, he was hunched over, one arm on the nightstand, the other clutching his chest. I froze for half a second too long. Then instincts kicked in. I remember dialing, shouting the address, yanking the oxygen machine on, even though I wasn't sure it was doing anything. I remember pressing on his chest with shaky hands, counting under my breath, and praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. The paramedics arrived in a blur of reflective jackets and clipped words. "You did good," one of them said as they lifted him onto the gurney. "Most people freeze." I didn't. Not because I wasn't terrified, but because he needed me not to be. At the hospital, I sat beside his bed while machines beeped and monitors blinked. The nurse told me he might not wake up. Then he did. Barely. His eyes opened slowly, like he had to decide whether the world was worth seeing again. "Brone," he whispered, like he was making sure I was real. "I'm here," I said, grabbing his hand. He looked at me for a long moment, his fingers weak but warm. "Do you believe in doing the right thing, even when it makes enemies?" I nodded without hesitation. "They love my name," he murmured. "But you loved my presence." I didn't speak. I couldn't. He closed his eyes again, but not to sleep, to think. "I changed it," he whispered. "The papers. Months ago. They don't know. Not yet. Timing, Brone? Truth needs timing." He didn't give me money. He handed me a war. When I left that room, I knew two things: that he wasn't just dying, he was passing something on, and that I wasn't ready. But I was the only one who could be. Now, sitting again in the hospital for my own follow-up, different wing, different reason, I saw the same nurse from that night. She blinked in surprise. "You again?" she said, scanning my chart. "Rib fracture?" "Something like that," I said, pulling my jacket closed. She didn't push, but when she looked up, her eyes softened. "Your family okay now?" I shook my head once. "No." "Some families protect each other," she said. Others protect their secrets. That line stayed with me all the way home. As I stepped through the front door, I knew I had to start documenting everything, not for them, but for me. Operation Elms, I scribbled at the top of a fresh notebook page. I listed names, dates, reactions, who said what, when, and how it made me feel. If this was war, I needed more than emotions. I needed facts. Later that evening, while rummaging through Grandpa's study, I found something else. A leather-bound journal, older than most of the books he'd collected, tucked behind a row of tax manuals. A sticky note was pressed to the front. For Brone, when the dust settles. My hands trembled as I opened it. The entries weren't dated in order. Some were just quotes he'd copied down. From Lincoln, you cannot escape the responsibility of tomorrow by evading it today. From To Kill a Mockingbird, people generally see what they look for and hear what they listen for. One page stood out. What is right is not always popular. What is popular is not always right. And then another, written in heavier ink, underlined twice. I only ever trusted one person to be honest when no one watched. That's who deserves to lead. I cried, not from pain but from validation. He saw me. All those years I thought I was background noise. He'd been watching. He knew. He didn't choose me to provoke them. He chose me because I never needed to be asked to show up. I set the journal on the table, lit a single lamp, and started reading from the beginning. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of the house. The garden beds were full of weeds, the back fence sagged, and the bird bath had cracked down the middle. Everything looked like it had given up, waiting for someone to either save it or bury it. I touched the fence rail where I used to sit as a kid while Grandpa read the paper. The hill we used to picnic on was overgrown, forgotten. But I remembered every peanut butter sandwich, every lecture about being kind even when people weren't. They didn't show up for any of that. I grabbed my journal and wrote, "This won't be a story of pity. This will be a story of proof." I wasn't the stray. I was the heir of his truth. That night, I made tea and sat by the window. The house had finally quieted, but something still felt off. Too still. Too watched. Then I heard it. The creak of the front gate. Slow. Measured. Not the wind. I set down my mug, walked to the front of the house, and parted the curtains. 3 silhouettes stood beyond the frosted glass, backlit by headlights crawling up the driveway. The porch light buzzed once, flickered again, then went out as if it didn't want to witness what was about to unfold. The silhouettes stayed still behind the frosted glass, 3 of them. I didn't need to open the door to know who they were. I could tell by the way the tallest stood dead center, arms locked, like he owned whatever space he was in. The other 2 hung slightly behind him, not timid, just calculated. I considered letting them stand there. Let the cold soak through their fancy coats, let the wind bite their pride. But deep down, I knew if I didn't answer, they'd just find another way in, and I'd rather face them than leave the initiative in their hands. I opened the door. "We need to talk about what happened," Bella said first, like she was ordering a coffee, not addressing the fact that her husband had just assaulted her daughter in front of half the town. I didn't step aside. "You mean what you did?" She smiled tightly, the kind of expression that looked rehearsed and painfully uncomfortable, like it had to stretch across decades of lies. "We didn't come here to fight." I glanced down at my side, which still screamed every time I shifted too fast. "Didn't come to fight? Just came to erase again?" They remained on the porch. I didn't offer them a seat. That doorframe became my line in the sand. Basia jumped in next, always the emotional opener. Her voice cracked, on cue. "You always misunderstood Dad. He wasn't himself. You know how emotional he gets. This whole situation, the will, it's been hard on everyone." "He wasn't emotional. He was intentional," I said flatly. She looked at me like I'd slapped her. But the act cracked for just a second, and I saw something else flicker through her eyes, irritation, that I wasn't playing the role she needed. Bila cleared her throat. "This legal confusion, it's clear your grandfather wasn't well. And that lawyer, he's always had questionable ethics." I took a breath, felt the tightness in my ribs, and steadied myself. He had that will notarized 6 months ago. His signature was solid. His words were clear. Their silence spoke louder than anything else. I narrowed my gaze. You knew, didn't you? Or at least suspected. Broan? Don't broan me, I snapped, sharper than I meant, but not sorry for it. If you came to change my mind, you should have brought more than guilt and gaslighting. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then my father stepped forward, not rushed, not aggressive. Just one step, enough to send a chill down my spine. If you think this is yours, he said calmly, think again. I met his eyes. I don't think... I know. He chuckled, but there was no humor in it. You always liked pretending you were stronger than you are. I've stopped pretending, I replied. His hand tightened at his side, not in a fist, just enough to show tension. You have one chance to walk away from this. Do the smart thing. I didn't blink. The smart thing was changing the locks. He looked at the door behind me, then back at me. Not everyone's meant to handle pressure, Broan. You're not built for war. And then, I smiled, not because I felt safe, but because he finally showed his hand. I don't need to be built for war, I said. I just need to be willing to finish one. I closed the door, slowly, deliberately, then turned the deadbolt. That was the moment I knew. They wouldn't go away, but they also wouldn't win easily. Later that week, a folded envelope was slid under my door. No name, just a scribbled Tuesday back garden, alone. I knew the handwriting. Dida Mia, my grandmother. I hadn't seen her since the funeral. She hadn't called, hadn't intervened, just watched the chaos like an ancient tree, rooted but silent. Tuesday came, and I walked out back. The garden, once her pride, had wilted under the neglect. But the old wooden bench, clean, waiting. She sat on it already, back straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. They think I don't remember, she said before I could open my mouth. But I do. I sat beside her, careful not to wince as my ribs protested. Your grandfather came to me before he changed the will, she continued. He told me everything. Said he finally saw the truth about Richard, about Beishia, about me too. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't need to. He told me you were the only one who never asked for anything. That's why he gave it all to you. Not out of favoritism, but preservation. I stared at her, waiting. I didn't stop him because for once he was right. And Broan? She turned her head, looked straight into me. Blood makes you related. Choice makes you family. He chose you. Tears prickled behind my eyes, but I blinked them away. Not now. Not for this moment. When I returned inside, I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I opened every drawer. Every cabinet. I scanned documents, took photos, started spreadsheets, dates, passwords, bank statements, scanned receipts. I laid it all out, one tile at a time, like a mosaic that would eventually become undeniable. I labeled one flash drive. Legacy, not negotiable. That night, I backed up everything I owned, digitally and emotionally, because what was coming wouldn't try to argue. It would try to erase. The second knock came on a Thursday afternoon, this time lighter, more deliberate, like a rehearsed gesture instead of a demand. I peered through the peephole and wasn't surprised to see Baccia standing there, holding a manila folder, her coat perfectly pressed, her lips pulled into a smile so forced it might have cracked if she blinked too fast. I opened the door, slowly. Can we have a civil conversation? She asked, tilting her head slightly, as if that gesture could smooth the knife between her words. I stepped back, not to invite her in, but to control the tempo. 10 minutes, I said. Everything's recorded now. Her smile didn't budge. Of course, she said, brushing past me and settling into the living room like she'd been invited for coffee instead of conflict. She didn't take off her coat. That told me something. She didn't plan to stay long. Good. You look... Well, she started, sitting on the edge of the couch. You've always been the smart one. I tilted my head, the way she just had. Flattery before the ambush? Classic. She chuckled. Just trying to make this less cold. You're about 3 funerals late for warmth, I replied. She opened the folder and slid a cashier's check across the coffee table. 50,000, she said, voice low. Clean. No questions asked. We'll even write it off as a family gesture. All you have to do is walk away. I leaned forward, picked up the check, not to admire it, but to scan the issuing bank. Noted the routing number. I set it back down like it was a piece of litter someone dropped inside my house. And in return? I asked, already knowing. You don't contest anything. You let Dad handle the estate, quietly, no headlines, no lawyers, no courtroom drama, she said, smoothing her skirt. We just move on. Isn't that what you want? I picked up my phone, unlocked it, and tapped record. Repeat that. Slowly. Her face paled just slightly. What are you doing? Protecting myself. You should try it sometime. She didn't repeat herself. She didn't need to. The recording already captured her tone, her offer, and the unspoken threat tucked inside each word. I leaned back in my chair. You think I'm bluffing. You think I want peace. She stiffened. I want precedent, I said. Her eyes narrowed. Do you really want to destroy your own bloodline over paper? No, I said. But you did the day you called me a thief. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her fingers curled slightly on her lap. I've already filed with my attorney, I continued. The paperwork's in motion. Injunction, restraining orders, financial review, everything. This house? Protected. Legally. Permanently. Bashia opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. And before you run back and report that, you should know something else, I said, pointing to the folder with the check. Next time you send someone, don't let her carry a bribe. It makes the whole "we're family" speech less believable. She stood slowly, every movement tighter than the last. You've changed, she said. No, I corrected. You just stopped hiding what you were. She left without another word. That morning, before her little performance, I'd met my attorney at the county clerk's office. We went over every line of the motion together. Asset protection, injunctions, a paper trail longer than Bashia's last relationship. My attorney Nancy looked at me over her glasses and said, They're going to escalate. Let them, I said, signing the final page. They're still playing checkers. She smirked. Let's make sure we're playing chess. We filed everything. I left that building with the quiet power of someone who wasn't afraid anymore. Grandpa used to say, loud people lose in quiet courts. He wasn't wrong. That night, I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I filed. At home, I opened the drawer in my desk and slid the check in between a printed copy of the will and the audio file from Basia's visit. I labeled the folder Lineage, neat, intentional. Then I started an evidence board, not with string and pins, but with dates, receipts, emails, voice memos, and a list of everyone who had suddenly decided I wasn't family anymore. It wasn't revenge, it was responsibility. Before I turned in for the night, I looked out the front window, and there he was. My father, standing on the sidewalk, beside a man in a charcoal suit holding a briefcase. When I opened the door, it wasn't just my father standing there, it was who stood next to him that caught my attention. The man was tall, silver hair, pressed suit, briefcase held like a weapon of diplomacy. He didn't look like a lawyer. He looked like someone who thought his words alone could bend a courtroom. This is Mr. Hall, Dad said flatly. A family estate advisor. Advisor, not attorney. No bar number. No legal standing. Just another smooth talker wrapped in a tailored jacket, here to spin papers into promises. Mr. Hall extended a hand, which I ignored. We'd like to resolve this matter peacefully, Miss Elms. Peace was an option before someone broke my rib, I said, leaning slightly on the doorframe. Perhaps we could discuss this inside, Hall offered, already taking a step forward. I don't invite people who sue me, I replied. Say what you came to say. They exchanged a glance. Then the briefcase clicked open, and out came a single document, printed on paper that looked suspiciously too crisp. This is a transfer agreement, Hall explained, sliding it into my view like a magician revealing his trick. Your grandfather signed this years ago, placing the estate under Mr. Elm's, your father's, control. I didn't touch it. Instead, I studied the header. The font was outdated, the letterhead from a firm that had merged 3 years ago. The spacing on the margins didn't match the rest of the page. Rookie mistakes. Why the sudden paperwork? I asked. To avoid embarrassment. For everyone involved, Dad said. And if I don't sign? Mr. Hall smiled, a practice thing. Then the story becomes public. You pressured a frail, confused old man. It won't look good to anyone. Interesting, I said. I'll let my team take a look. I pulled out my phone and snapped 3 pictures before either of them reacted. Their discomfort was immediate. That told me everything. Thank you for coming by, I added, holding the phone steady. But this meeting is over. Back inside, I poured a glass of water and tried to shake off the feeling that someone had just spit on my grandfather's grave. But the fight wasn't just happening behind closed doors anymore. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with notifications. At first, I thought it was more texts from Nancy, my attorney, but then I saw the tags, dozens of them. Batia had posted a photo. A grainy image from the funeral, zoomed in on me, face caught mid-step, shadows under my eyes. Caption: When greed looks like grief. The comment section lit up like dry timber. Some defended me, others didn't hold back. She shoved her father. She wanted the money. Guess who'll sell that house in 6 months? I scrolled through them, fists clenched, chest tight. Then I remembered Grandpa's words. Control the frame, Broan. Or they'll turn you into their story. I opened my laptop and started a folder. Counter-narrative. I uploaded time-stamped photos from the funeral. Grandpa's will, notarized and dated, copies of the medical records from the hospital visit I sat through alone, voice memos he'd left on my phone. Quiet affirmations, loving reminders. I drafted a statement, not defensive, not bitter. Inheritance isn't earned through noise, it's earned through presence, and records don't lie. I didn't post it immediately, I scheduled it. Quiet, deliberate, timed for when the fury burned hottest online. They wanted war through whispers. I answered with facts. But they didn't stop. 2 days later, an email landed in my inbox. No subject line, just an attachment and a message. Thought you should see this. Screenshots. Messages I'd allegedly sent. Cruel, conniving things. Words I would never use. Conversations that never happened. But the backgrounds were off. The fonts didn't match. The timestamps conflicted with my phone logs. It was a fake, a digital forgery, probably made using one of those mobile apps where you can stage fake texts. I forwarded the screenshots to a friend of mine from college, Sam, now a digital forensics analyst. Within an hour, he sent back a brief report. Not authentic, created via third-party tool, not admissible in court, but damaging, yes. I exhaled slowly. They weren't just lying about me now. They were trying to erase me. I sent Sam's report to Nancy and added it to the folder. My paper shield was getting thicker, stronger. And yet, it stung. Because there's something deeply personal about being slandered by the people who once tucked you in at night. I printed every fake message, every screenshot, every false accusation. I labeled them, documented everything, not just for the court, for me, because when it came time to sit across from them in a judge's chambers, I wouldn't just be defending a house. I'd be defending the woman Grandpa raised me to be. I stared at the calendar pinned to the fridge. Tomorrow. That's when the pretrial began. So I opened my email, found the contact Grandpa had told me to keep, his old lawyer from the days before the others got involved, and I typed. Subject: They've escalated. Message: You said to call if things ever got ugly. It's time. The envelope arrived 2 days after the visit from Mr. Hall, the man who smiled too much for someone wielding forged documents. It was hand-delivered, certified, with my grandfather's name typed neatly in the return address. A small part of me hoped it would be something comforting, a letter, a memory, maybe even instructions meant only for me. It wasn't. Inside was a letter from the bank. It included an overdraft notice and a statement from a joint account that, until now, I hadn't known existed. The statement detailed a massive withdrawal, $85,000, authorized by my father 3 weeks before Grandpa died. He'd drained it, using power of attorney, using a man's trust when he was already too weak to fight back. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the paper, running my fingers over the date. The timing wasn't just cruel, it was tactical. Grandpa had been in and out of the hospital. I remembered that week clearly because I was there, picking up prescriptions, fighting with insurance reps, making soup he never finished. And while I was fighting to extend his days, my father was behind the scenes preparing to erase him. I checked the estate documents, the trust paperwork, and the bank information I'd compiled. That account wasn't even listed. It had been tucked under a different branch, likely opened years ago and left to collect dust until they needed it. This wasn't desperation, it was strategy. They planned this heist as a family. The next day, I dressed in a neutral blouse and slacks, grabbed my laptop bag, and walked into the local bank as if I were just another customer. I didn't use anger or threats. I used posture. A woman who looks like she knows the policies often gets more than someone demanding them. At the desk, I smiled at the teller and said I was a co-executor of Harold Elm's estate. I'm tying up loose ends, I added with a soft tone. Just making sure no accounts were overlooked. She hesitated, but typed. I could see her eyes narrow slightly. She pulled up something, then stepped away to talk to her supervisor. I waited. I didn't tap my fingers. I didn't blink too fast. When she returned, she lowered her voice. There was an $85,000 withdrawal, cash, filed under early remodeling plans. He said the house would be his in weeks. Did he say that exactly? I asked, still smiling. She nodded once. We documented it, standard for large cash movement. Can I get a copy of that statement for my files? She hesitated. Only the executor can authorize that. I leaned forward slightly. Good thing I am one. Probate office verified it last week. She printed the statement without another word. Back in my car, I stared at the paper. They hadn't just stolen from Grandpa. They'd prepared to erase my claim before he was even gone. I opened the glove box, pulled out a small accordion folder, and tucked the statement behind a tab I'd labeled Fraud Tree. By nightfall, I wasn't just angry. I was certain. They thought I was weak because I didn't fight loud. They hadn't realized I fight clean. It was almost midnight when I remembered something else. Something Grandpa once mentioned about the funeral home, discreet security cameras. They record services for families, he said during one of our conversations, so people can relive what mattered. I pulled up the website, found the contact page, and submitted a request. Then I followed up with a call. Hi, yes, I'm Brone Elms. I was injured at a service you hosted recently. I may need the footage for an insurance review. Can I submit a formal request? They hesitated. I could hear the manager whispering to someone in the background. When he returned, his voice was firm. We can provide footage if there's potential litigation, he said. There might be, I replied calmly. 2 days later, a flash drive arrived by courier. I sat down in my bedroom, turned off the lights, and watched. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to catch everything. My father, his face red, his jaw set, standing, shouting, walking toward the podium. The letter being torn, the gasp in the crowd. Then, the moment that haunted me even more on screen than it had in real time. Him grabbing my arm, the way I stumbled, my body folding as I hit the bench. But it wasn't his rage that gutted me, it was theirs. My mother, sitting stiffly, her head turned ever so slightly, her expression vacant. Basia, chewing her lip, glancing at me only once before looking down. Not one flinch, not one hand lifted, not one voice raised to stop it. That kind of silence doesn't protect, it convicts. I extracted the clips, time-stamped them, and saved them to the encrypted drive. Watching myself break in slow motion was harder than feeling it live. The physical pain was easier. This was betrayal with a pause button. Sometimes it's not the person who hits you that does the most damage, it's the ones who watch. Later that night, I began writing a personal statement. Not for court, not yet, just for clarity, a place to name what they did, what they didn't. I included how many seconds passed before anyone moved after I hit the pew. 11. Long enough to catch a breath. Long enough to make a choice. The next morning, I pulled everything together. Bank statements, funeral footage, notarized documents, the false messages they'd posted online, screenshots of their smear campaign. I organized them into folders, printed backup copies, and placed drives in 3 separate locations: a fireproof box, Nancy's law office, and with my friend Sam. I didn't tell them what I was doing. I didn't need to, because they mistook my silence for surrender. They thought I wouldn't come prepared. But I wasn't just fighting for an inheritance anymore. I was protecting a name, a legacy. My grandfather once told me, "You don't warn people who've already crossed the line, you draw one." And I had. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Bella. Her voice was calm. Too calm. "Have you seen the news?" The email subject line read, "Let's be civil." It came from Basha. No hello, no explanation, just an invitation to a family meeting at the country club conference room off Main. They even attached a Google Calendar link, like Betrayal could be scheduled in 30-minute increments. I stared at it for a full minute before closing my laptop. I didn't need to guess what it was. They weren't inviting me to talk. They were inviting me to fold. Still, I said yes. Not because I thought peace was possible, because I wanted to watch them try to dress a dagger in lace. I pulled out the folder I'd labeled Truth, stuffed it with Grandpa's notarized will, printed bank statements, the footage from the funeral, and my own quiet anger. I dressed in navy. Simple, strong, undeniable. No emotion in the silhouette, just presence. When I walked into the conference room, they were already seated. Bella, Basia, and my father. And across from them, a man I recognized. David Colburn. Their so-called estate consultant, which is family code for legal smoke machine. The table was neatly set, folders in place, water bottles untouched. On the center stack lay a thick set of documents with a blue ribbon tied around them. Bella was the first to speak. "Thank you for coming, Brone. We wanted to show you this, your grandfather's original intention." I raised an eyebrow. "Before what? Before he realized none of you deserved it?" Her lips tightened. "Before he became confused." Confused enough to sign 3 notarized copies of a will? Must have been some clarity in that confusion. Basia cleared her throat and gestured to the papers. "This is a will from 2 years ago. It names Dad as the sole heir." I didn't even look at it. My eyes stayed on her face. Colburn slid the documents toward me. "We're offering a reasonable division of assets. No court, no scandal." I glanced down. "Is that Comic Sans on a legal document?" I asked, deadpan. The silence that followed was delicious. "You can walk away," my father finally said, with dignity. "No," I replied. "You can walk away, with decency, if there's any left." Tension wrapped the room like plastic. And then Bella stood. "I think we need prayer," she said, walking behind her chair and folding her hands. I didn't interrupt. I was too curious what version of scripture she'd twist today. "Lord," she began, "we ask for protection against wolves in sheep's clothing, against those who claim inheritance through manipulation, those who steal honor while wearing the skin of the faithful." Basia chimed in with a soft, "Amen." I stared at the tabletop, then back at Bella. "If you're going to weaponize God," I said calmly, "at least get the verses right." Her face flushed. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "You'll want to hear how you sound." She stopped. Of course she did. "Funny thing about people who pray before they stab," I said, rising from my seat. "They always forget God hears better than I do." I pulled out the copies of Grandpa's real will, placed them on the table one at a time like laying down cards in a poker game. Notarized, witnessed, dated, legal. Then the funeral footage, time-stamped, angle clear, the push, my fall, no one moving. And finally, the bank logs. Every withdrawal, every signature, every penny they tried to vanish before the ink dried. "This," I said, tapping the envelope in the center, "is what I'm filing. Not because I want revenge, because I want a record. For the court. For history." They didn't speak. Becha looked at her nails. Bella's hands trembled slightly. My father just clenched his jaw like he could grind down the truth with enough pressure. "These documents you brought?" I continued, nodding at their pile. "They're not forged. They're fantasies. Delusions typed in 12-point betrayal." I walked out without another word. Outside, the late afternoon wind met me like a relief. I stood still in the parking lot, letting it cut through my blouse, through the armor I'd wrapped around myself for weeks. I exhaled. No one followed me. And that silence? That was the clearest answer I'd gotten all year. Driving home, I didn't play music. Just let the wheels hum on the asphalt, my mind processing each moment. By the time I pulled into the driveway, Nancy had texted, "You ready to file tomorrow?" I typed back, "Let's burn it down." But legally. I slept light that night. Not from fear, but from something else. A readiness. A coiled steadiness. Because the next knock, it wasn't on my door. It was on theirs. The week leading up to court felt like standing in a pressure cooker set on low. It wasn't silence. It was pressure without steam, tension without sound. My phone no longer lit up with calls from my family. No more condescending texts from Bashia or guilt-laced voicemails from my mother. Just one vague message from Bela. "Broan, this doesn't have to go that far. We're still blood." I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by stacks of documentation. Every folder had a label. Medical records, financial transfers, visitation logs, funeral footage, audio transcripts. My attorney's voice was a steady beat in my head. Paper wins cases. Emotion loses them. But this wasn't just a case to me. This was legacy warfare. This was rewriting the ending to a family story they tried to ghostwrite without me. I packed the final folder into my leather satchel, sealed the flap, and whispered aloud to the empty room, "Let's finish this." The Ogden courthouse was colder than I remembered. The wooden benches polished, yet dry as old bones. The air buzzed with subdued conversations, rustling suits, and the hum of fluorescence overhead. I sat down and waited. Across the aisle, they entered. Basia led the pack, striding like she owned the floor in black heels and matching blazer. Bella, ever the ghost in her own life, looked small and brittle. And my father? Stoic, stone-faced, like a man preparing to deny the truth under oath. None of them looked at me, except Basia. She offered a faint, sarcastic nod, the kind that says, "You're not ready for what's coming." Their lawyer was quick to act. A well-practiced voice rose from the opposing table. "We contend the decedent was under undue influence at the time of the will's amendment. The beneficiary in question had minimal prior contact with Mr. Elms, and the circumstances suggest manipulation. They'd written me out of their hearts. Now they were trying to write me out of his legacy." My attorney stood. "We submit a supplemental exhibit, Your Honor. A letter from a staff member at Elms Assisted Living Facility." A rustle of surprise passed through the room. The judge nodded. "Proceed." The caregiver's letter was read aloud. She wrote how I had visited regularly, managed Grandpa's medications, sat through checkups, filed insurance paperwork, adjusted his thermostat when it squeaked, made soup when his cough came back. Bella and Baccia, holiday visitors. "Only stayed 20 minutes each time," the letter said. "Left before dessert." I watched Bella. Her eyes welled up, not with tears, with something worse, recognition. But she said nothing. Silence was her favorite shield. Then came the audio. We played a decades-old recording, captured accidentally on a cassette player left running in Grandpa's den. A younger Baccia, her voice light but forced, practiced lines with Bela. "Say you got an A in civics," Bella coached. "He loves that subject. Say you helped at church even if you didn't. He loves when you act involved." Then her voice darkened. "And don't bring up Broan. He's tired of her moods." The courtroom air thickened. Scratchy as the tape was, it was enough. The judge allowed the transcript in full. The past wasn't a distant wound. It was an open pattern. Next came their unraveling. My father took the stand. He avoided eye contact, gave vague, evasive answers about estate withdrawals. Dates didn't align. Receipts vanished. His lawyer tried to redirect, but the judge leaned in, scribbling heavily. Basia was asked about the funeral prayer. She smiled too quickly. It was a spiritual moment, no malicious intent. We played the video. Bella was asked, under oath, if she coached her daughter to manipulate her father. She pressed her lips tight and said nothing. It wasn't their words that convicted them. It was their weight, the inconsistencies, the contradictions, the silence. The judge exhaled, leaned back, and said, "We will reconvene for judgment next Thursday." But I didn't need to hear it. I already knew the verdict. The call came mid-morning while I was folding laundry. My attorney's voice was calm, but her words carried weight. "The verdict is in. You'll want to sit for this." I did. The judge's written opinion landed like a silent bell. No fanfare, no dramatic pause, just a clear, decisive statement. The will was valid, fully enforceable, and recognized the sustained pattern of elder abuse from my father and his enablers. More than that, the court formally acknowledged what I had known in my bones for years. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a generational weapon polished to shine. Her voice softened when she added, "Also, their legal team withdrew. No appeal. No further defense." I didn't celebrate. I didn't scream. I sat, eyes closed, and breathed. I thought of what Ruth Bader Ginsburg once said. "Fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you." I didn't do it for vengeance. I did it because silence was too heavy. In the days that followed, I learned the estate had been frozen pending a complete financial audit. Apparently, my father's earlier asset withdrawals, done under shaky power of attorney, triggered a civil review. Investigators weren't just looking into bank accounts anymore, they were digging into intention, into pattern. Strangers started approaching me on walks around the block. A few were neighbors who had caught glimpses of the funeral video that somehow leaked online. One older couple paused near the mailbox and said, "That footage broke our hearts. You didn't deserve that." Even without names, a local paper ran a feature on undue influence and estate fraud. They cited a prominent local family and detailed a daughter's quiet pursuit of justice. I never confirmed or denied anything. I didn't need to. When the world sees truth clearly, there's no need to shout. You just let it settle. It was in the back of the pantry, inside a cookbook I hadn't touched in over a decade. Grandpa had slipped a sealed envelope between dog-eared pages of chicken pot pie and buttermilk biscuits. On the front, he had written simply, "In case they try to erase me." Inside was a thank you letter he had written to my mother years ago, after surviving a heart attack. It was beautiful. Raw. Gratitude soaked into every word. But I remembered this letter, not because I'd read it before, but because I remembered hearing about the moment it was torn in half. Bella had ripped it apart when Grandpa refused to hand over his investment accounts. Yet, like everything else he cherished, he made a backup. In the letter, he wrote, "True gratitude is not loud. It's written in how we protect each other when no one's watching." I wept, not because I missed him, but because he never stopped protecting me, even when I didn't know I needed it. A week later, Bella and Basia returned. Not in rage, not to reclaim anything, just to remember. They stood on my porch, eyes low, and asked if I'd consider giving them a few heirlooms. Some framed pictures, a ring, maybe a book from Grandpa's study. They didn't ask for money. They didn't ask for keys, just a piece of a past that no longer belonged to them. I didn't invite them in. Instead, I handed them a photo. One of Grandpa with all of us together, taken in 2001. The last real moment before things broke beyond repair. "This is what I'm keeping," I said. Bella's eyes welled up. Basia's lips tightened, but she didn't speak. They left without another word. Official title transfer documents came 2 days later. The house, the land, the remaining estate, all now in my name. I filed the papers with quiet efficiency. No Instagram post, no headline, just a notary, a pen, and a long exhale. That afternoon, I donated a portion of the inheritance to an elder justice fund. Named it after Grandpa. No one needed to know except the people it would help. I stepped into his study one last time. His chair remained untouched, I didn't sit in it. I placed his photo on the mantel and walked away. They had stopped trying to take from me, but I wasn't done giving. I opened a drawer I hadn't touched since the trial ended. Inside was a form Grandpa had asked me to file years ago, the Harold Elms Memorial Fund application, a program meant to offer grants for families navigating elder care, financial literacy, and estate advocacy. He knew. Long before any of this unfolded, he knew. So I picked up the pen. The attic was coated in a film of dust that seemed to hum with decades of secrets. I hadn't climbed those stairs since I was a child, back when the idea of family still felt whole. As I shifted old boxes and lifted a broken lamp from a side trunk, I found it. A drawer in Grandpa's antique desk that had always been locked. 2 days later, Betia reached out. "Just coffee," she wrote. "No accusations." I chose the diner near the courthouse, neutral ground. We sat across from each other, the hum of espresso machines filling the space between. She looked tired, older. "I was always jealous of you," she said. "You got his attention, his approval." I stirred my coffee. "Mom taught me how to survive," she continued, "but never how to be soft." I didn't interrupt. "You weren't my threat," I said when she finished. "You just never saw what love without control looked like." She nodded. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We paid and left. No backward glances. Back home, I began to reclaim the house. Room by room, I peeled away the curated illusion. Portraits of a perfect family came down. In their place, I framed Grandpa's letters, his old sketches, my law degree. The guest room became my writing space. I planned to collect stories from others who'd been cut out of their family trees. A friend visited and paused in the living room. "It doesn't feel heavy in here anymore," she said. "It's not haunted," I replied. "It's held." That night, I wrote a letter, not to them, to me, to the girl 5 years ago who thought love had to be earned by shrinking. I told her thank you. Thank you for surviving, for not disappearing into silence. I sealed it and placed it in the drawer Grandpa had once locked. Then I went outside and planted a tree, named it Bryn. Wrote a line in my journal. Blood made me part of their history. Truth made me the start of my own. Later that week, a letter arrived. The return address was from the state, a grant approval, stamped with Grandpa's name. The envelope was small, padded, and sealed with tape that had yellowed slightly at the corners. It had sat in Grandpa's old briefcase, untouched, labeled in his distinct handwriting, "If they ever lie about me." That was all. Inside was a single USB drive. No password, no folder nesting, just one video file. I plugged it into my laptop, my heart already knowing it wasn't just another file. The screen flickered. Then his face appeared. Grandpa. The lighting was dim, like a back room, or maybe his old den. He sat straight, gaze unwavering. "If you're watching this," he began, "it means they tried to erase the truth. Let me be clear. No one manipulated me. No one coerced me. I changed my will because I watched them lie, cheat, and neglect, while Brone stayed, while she fought for me, not my estate." He paused, visibly pained, then quieter. "I enabled it for too long. I excused too much. But I won't let them bury what they did with me. I choose Brone not for blood, but for what she bleeds to protect." The screen went black. I sat stunned. Then I uploaded it to the court record, but I didn't stop there. I posted it anonymously on a public forum dedicated to elder advocacy. It spread like a fever. Within hours, the local news picked it up. Then, regional outlets. Then social media. I never said a word. Just changed my bio to, "Legacy doesn't lie." That night, I got a message from my attorney. "You just won without filing a single additional motion." The public backlash didn't knock. It stormed. My mother was asked to resign from the local women's charity board. Betia lost 2 brand deals by the end of the week. One company posted a statement referencing integrity concerns raised by newly surfaced evidence. People who had once smiled at them in church now avoided eye contact. Neighbors I barely knew began stopping me during walks. Some brought baked goods, some just nodded. A few whispered, "We saw it. We believe you." I didn't want applause. I wanted the pressure to ease. It didn't. Not right away, but it shifted. A week later, I opened a folder labeled Grant, HEMF. Grandpa had mentioned it once, briefly. "If things go right, there's a state match waiting for you," he'd said. I filled out the forms, proposed the launch of the Harold Elms Memorial Fund, dedicated to protecting seniors from exploitation, training young women in estate law, and offering community legal workshops. 3 weeks later, the state approved it. They even matched it. At the launch, I kept it small. Held it in the Ogden Courthouse atrium. A judge who remembered Grandpa said a few words. A social worker from his old facility cried quietly during my speech. I ended it with his line, "Injustice buried quietly will always rise louder one day." The house transformed with me. I renovated it with intention. Grandpa's study became my consultation office. I kept his chair, but placed my desk opposite it. I hung the notarized copy of his final will behind me. I framed the still shot from his video below it. Each room changed, no longer shrines to a toxic family, but living, breathing spaces. I opened curtains, removed portraits of fake smiles, replaced them with sketches Grandpa made, and my own framed diploma. I added a brass plaque on the gate. The Elms House, built on truth, protected by law. Then came their final visit. Bella and Baccia emailed through my lawyer. "We want to talk, privately." I chose the county records office. They arrived expecting sympathy, maybe softness. Instead, I handed them signed documentation. They were permanently removed from any future estate influence. No heirlooms, no executor rights, no footnotes. Baccia opened her mouth. I stopped her. "This isn't revenge. It's reinforcement." Bella finally asked, "Will you ever forgive us?" I said, gently but firmly, "I already did. The day I stopped needing you to admit what you did." That evening, I returned to Grandpa's library, the last place untouched. His favorite book rested on the middle shelf, To Kill a Mockingbird. I opened it. Near the final page, a folded note waited. The house was never the point. The name was never the point. You were. I didn't cry. I smiled. I closed the book, slipped it into the shelf, and stepped outside. Snow had just begun to fall. For the first time in years, the house felt warm. Not because they were gone, but because I stayed.